February 1st, y'all, and so that means it is time for our February block, which is the rail fence. It's this block here. I hope you had fun making your 4-patch last month, and now we move on. Now, this block is pretty easy to make. However, it is important that you really use the tips that I provide, because since we are sewing 4 strips together in sets, you actually can lose some of your fabric within the seams if you don't use starch, if you don't press really flat, and if you don't use a scant 1/4 inch. So make sure you watch the tutorial, because I know when I've made this block for the first time, actually 2 of my units were actually a little bit short than the other 2. And part of that is because whenever I was sewing all of mine, I didn't sew with a scant 1/4 inch. So just keep that in mind, really important. There's tips for you in the pattern to follow so that this all comes out where you've got a really perfect square. So let's get started on our February block and make the rail fence. Well, let's get started in making our February block, the rail fence. Now, this is a fairly simple block. However, there are some tips in here that are really important for your blocks to turn out. And even for me, it can be real easy to forget to do some of these things. But I promise you, if you pay attention and do, then it will help your blocks turn out better. And it has to do with the fact that we're actually sewing 3 or 4 strips together. And when we do that, we're wanting to make sure that we sew with a scant 1/4 inch. Now, there's a little tip for you in the pattern there on finding your scant 1/4 inch, but basically it's just a hair to the left of your 1/4 inch mark on your sewing machine. And I'll show you that whenever we get over to the sewing machine. But I want to mention that for this block, because we're sewing so many strips together, you could lose bits of fabric if you don't sew with a scant 1/4 inch. Also, another thing you're going to want to do is make sure you starch your fabric really well and press it really well and flat. So when we sew some of our strips together, you're going to be opening them up and pressing. You're going to want to make sure that you completely press that flat when you fold it over and you don't have any bunched up fabric in there, and you're going to want to make sure that you also use starch. Otherwise, you can lose, 1/16 of an inch, whatever it may be, over and over again, and your blocks could be a little short. So I want to mention that up front. So the block is not complicated, but those tips of the scant 1/4 inch as well as starch and pressing are really important with this particular block. Okay, so one of the things that you'll remember from last month with the block you had leftover fabric. You have leftover A and B fabrics. For me, that was the teal and also the terracotta. So you'll just pull out the leftover strip that you had, and you'll cut your fabrics to the fabric requirements that are mentioned as far as your strips that you need to cut. You'll need 4 of them. And then you also are going to pick a B and a C fabric. So I've picked the pink and then also the off-white color here. So those are the colors that I'm actually going to be using. So the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to work with our A and our C first. So I'm just going to go ahead and take these alphabet clips off. You can find these in my shop. I have these made. I used to make them myself. Now I have them manufactured. If you're needing something to label fabrics, I'll link those for you below in my shop. Otherwise, just use whatever works for you to label your fabrics. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take your A fabric, for me it's the teal, and lay it on top of your C fabric here. All right. And then what you're going to do is you're going to sew a scant 1/4 inch all the way down this strip. For your second strip set, you're going to take put your D fabric on the bottom, and for me, my B fabric is my terracotta, so that is going to go on top. Line that up. And then you're going to go to your sewing machine and you're going to sew a scant 1/4 inch all the way down. So let's go to my sewing machine and let me show you where my scant 1/4 inch is on my machine. Okay, we are here at my sewing machine, and this is what I want to show you. Now, you may not have a laser on your machine, and this is an add-on for me. Now, I have what's called a 1/4 inch foot, but I also have a 1/4 inch marking right here. Let's see if you can see that. It says 1/4, and it is this line right here. You see where the 7 is all the way down. That is a 1/4 inch. Now, let me zoom in. Do you see how my laser is just to the left of that gray line right there? That's my scant 1/4 inch. So your scant 1/4 inch is once where you find where your 1/4 inch is, you need to move just a hair, maybe a stitch length or two to the left, and that is what's called a scant. So I wanted to show you what that looks like on mine. So the gray line here is a 1/4 inch. To the left there where the laser is a scant 1/4 inch. That will be what's important for you to sew your strips with, because when we fold these open, it can be really easy to lose length in your fabric and your blocks won't turn out the right size. So I wanted to show that to you first before we sew our strips. Okay, so here we are at the sewing machine, and I've got one of my strip sets here ready to go, and notice I'm keeping the fabric just to the left of the 1/4 inch. If you can see that over here where my laser is, I've got that lined up. And so you're just going to come down and just watch it and make sure. You're not going to want to be sewing really fast, especially if you're a beginner. Just go slow. Make sure you keep the strip lined up, so you may have to just kind of readjust as you go. Make sure that's lined up and that you're following that scant 1/4 inch there. Remember, just to the left of that 1/4 inch line. And then I'm also going to show you how to press these, because I want to show you, especially again if you're new, the things that can happen with pressing. And this fabric was already starched. I starched it and pressed it before I actually cut into it. So that'll be important to make sure you do that. But also, whenever we do some more pressing, it'll be important for you to starch again. So you see how I'm just having to make sure that this strip stays lined up really well? Just take your time. I'm also using 80 weight thread. 80 weight thread is thinner than 50 weight thread, which a lot of people piece with. I prefer to use 80 weight thread because you don't lose any of your fabric within the seam whenever you are pressing. And so those are just a few little tips for you to help you. You'll use those, you know, as you keep quilting in the future. I've found that they're really, really helpful for me. Okay, so now we have sewn that strip. So let's go to the cutting station. Now I have a little ruler here. I want to show you something. You can measure this one here. This tells you what is a 1/4 inch there. Okay, it tells you there is a 1/4 inch. So you may want to measure yours a little bit. Now this one may not be 100% precise. I'm not exactly sure with this ruler there, but it's actually just a little bit less. It may be hard for you to see it from the angle that we're at. This one's actually just a little bit less, so that's your scant there. So let's go over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you how to press this correctly so you don't lose any of the seam whenever you're doing your pressing. Okay, so first thing you want to do, it's called setting your seam. And that's actually where you just press on top before you open it up. And what I like to do, we'll start down here at this end. I like to just use my fingers first and make sure that I have pushed all that fabric out of the way, that none of it is like accidentally bunched over this way, because you will lose some of your fabric there and your blocks won't turn out correctly. So again, just really press and kind of push that out without really stretching it or warping it. You're going to want to make sure that you push all of that out so that it is nice and flat. So you see, that is completely pressed open. And what can happen is if you don't get this completely pressed open, then you could see how it would make it shorter. All right, so you'll go ahead and do that with both of your strip sets and completely press those again. And I actually like to put, when I do all of this, I'll spray starch all the way down, make sure it's good and saturated, and then again, press completely open. Okay, so we've got our 2 strip sets sewn together and pressed and starched really, really well. And we've sewn with a scant 1/4 inch. So now what we're gonna do is you are going to put these units together. So you're gonna just put right sides together where your fabrics will line up like that. And then you're gonna sew a scant 1/4 inch all the way down here, just like we did before. And make sure when you press it really flat and starch it really well. Okay, so now we've sewn both of our strip units together. And so now we are gonna actually make our cuts. We're actually gonna cut our units, 4 of them. We're actually gonna cut 4 units here. So we've got 1. And it's best to use your ruler. I have a ruler that's wide enough to do this. So it's better to use the measurements on your ruler than your cutting mat. But if you have a ruler that is, you know, maybe only 3.5 inches or what have you, and you have to use your cutting mat, you can. But you're gonna get more accurate measurements if you do it this way. And we've got this one, and then 1 more. And we will have our 4 units here. Okay, so now we've got all 4 of our units. Okay, so the next thing that you're gonna do is take 2 of them. And what you're gonna wanna make sure when you look at the photo, you're gonna see where an L, this should make an L whenever we open it up. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna take right sides together, you're going to take your first unit and your lines are going to be going this direction. You're going to take your other unit and it will be lines are going this direction. And you're going to place them on top of each other like this. So you see how that is? This is going across. This fabric here is going down. And then you're going to sew a scant 1/4 inch all the way down on this one, okay? I'm gonna set that aside though before I do, and you're gonna do the exact same thing on your second set here. So it's right sides together, so pretty side, pretty side. This one is turned this direction, sideways, and then this one is up and down. And you're gonna do the exact same thing like this, and you're gonna sew a scant 1/4 inch down here. Now, what can happen if you accidentally don't pay attention, you could take this to your sewing machine and accidentally sew it on the wrong side. Ask me how I know. I had to unpick. So I like to keep mine exactly like I'm going to pick it up and take it over to the sewing machine just like this so I don't accidentally turn it the wrong way. So you'll sew those together and then we will press and we'll sew those units together. Okay, so we've got both of our units here, and let me zoom out a little bit. So you've got this unit and this unit. So now you're gonna wanna make sure that everything is lined up. So make sure you look at your diagram, whatever color you've picked to be there in your center there, that is what you're gonna want to be touching, okay? So that's gonna all be kind of touching like this. So you're gonna lay those like that, make sure it's the right direction. And then you're gonna put right sides together, flip it over, and nest your seams. So what that means is you've pressed these in opposite directions according to the instructions so that your seams are gonna butt right up against each other right there. And I like to put a pin in it because it will move on me if I don't. So pinning can really be key. So I like to pin there first, and then I'll come down here to the end and pin those together as well on this end, and then also down here on this end to get those lined up. And then we're gonna sew scant 1/4 inch all the way down here. Okay, there you go. So you've sewn those two together, you've gone and you've pressed the seam open on the back, and there you go. You have your rail fence block. Now, if for some reason you notice that the opposite blocks here, particularly I believe it's, if I remember correctly, these two, if those are a little short, which when I've made this block for the very first time, that happened. And that is because I was not sewing with a scant 1/4 inch. And there were a couple of seams that were not completely pressed really flat and open. So if you find that that's the case with you, you need to really go back and make sure that you're sewing with a scant 1/4 inch. You're using starch and you're pressing really, really flat so that you've got pretty much a square here. And that it's pretty much, you might be slightly, just a little teeny bit off, but as long as it's not, you know, more than, I'd say, about 1/8 of an inch, you'll be fine, because this will, of course, be sewn into another block. So that is your rail fence. This is your February block, and I will look forward to seeing you in March for our block then. Until next time, quilty friends, make lovely things.